Hey everybody, we've read some Plato. Now I think it's time for a little lecture about Platonism. There's some things that we're going to be reading here that a little bit of background in Plato will be helpful for those of you who are just, for the first time reading some Plato with us. So we read the Euthyphro, get a good idea of why it's so necessary to inquire, and how, really pursuing the truth is pious, and using the truth, using whatever, is impious. I think that's what's going on in the Euthyphro, mostly. And then book 2 of Republic gives us arguments offered as playing the devil's advocate, arguments that justice is not desirable. We don't want to be just. We're only just reluctantly because we feel like we can't get away with actually being good. So, powerful arguments, and the reason that we review them is so that we understand what an account of justice, what an account of goodness should do for us. To us too, maybe, right? An account of what it really is to be good, what it really is to be just, should show us why that thing is desirable in itself. We don't want these things just for, what they can get us. We don't want to just use those things, right? So is it even possible to value justice the right way, Glaucon wonders. Adamantus throws in, arguments regarding the afterlife. What does belief in an afterlife and a judgment do for us, for justice? So I hope you enjoyed that discussion. I really did. We're going to pick up with book 6 now. We're skipping ahead a little bit. And book 6 and the very beginning of book 7, we're going to find Plato's account of the good. Now, Plato's account of the good here is sketchy in a real significant way. Socrates says that, gosh, I wish I could just tell you what the good was, but I can't. It's not possible, he thinks, to really give an account of the good like he's wanting to. Okay, something we're skipping briefly. Something in the sections that we're skipping over that we want to notice. There's a treatment of the philosopher king, or the philosopher kings. It's argued that this society with a fever is only going to get any better. It's only going to start approaching justice when the philosophers are the kings, or the kings become philosophers. I always feel a little weird teaching this because it feels a little self-serving, but we're going to see in our reading, actually, that no philosopher wants to be a king. So, but following along in the discussion that we had last week, in our last video here, we are in this discussion of the philosopher, getting some clarity on the difference between the true philosopher and the sophist, the specious philosopher who's trying just to make the weaker appear stronger and the stronger appear weaker, the person who's just dancing with words for power, right? Now, I don't know if we really need to read over that point, because I think we kind of already saw that in the Euthyphro. It's pretty powerful there, right? Pursuing the truth. So in this section, Plato has Socrates argue that the philosophers should be the kings because, by definition, right? Not me. Not all philosophers are philosophers. I am, but, And a lot of people who aren't philosophers professionally are philosophers, like Matt, like you, who's following along here, right? If we really care about the truth, and we really pursue the truth and try to see through the shadows that are blinding us, we will be the true philosophers. We will be the only ones who have a chance to glimpse the truth. not to grasp it and control it and sell it, but to glimpse it, maybe dimly through a glass. But it really takes that sincere approach, that sincere desire, the love. It's about love, the love of the truth. Okay, Socrates tells us someplace that love, it's in the Symposium, love is the only thing he knows. It's like convenient that we're finally talking about a topic that I know. Anyway, so the good. We're getting Plato's account of the good. To help us understand some of the peculiarities that we're finding here, for those who are new to Plato, let me tell you a little bit about Plato's theory of forms, and relatedly, the doctrine of recollection. These are interesting. They're interesting, right? If we're reading along with Plato here, we're reading the Euthyphro, we think, gosh, it makes sense that Socrates doesn't have a lot of theories, that Socrates doesn't have a lot of beliefs about metaphysics. He's out there trying to see who really knows what they think they know. He's not out there putting forward all these doctrines that he can't really support, right? He's telling you, question yourself. So, it gets a little funny when there are these they're really weird, metaphysical doctrines being floated, being argued for, being proffered. There's the word. So it seems a little weird, but here's the background that I think we should know. Let me start with Heraclitus. Heraclitus is a pre-Socratic philosopher. That's a philosopher around Greece, that general vicinity, who's working before Socrates. Right? Socrates is so important that earlier philosophers are called pre-Socratic philosophers. So Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher, says famously something along the lines of, you can't step in the same river twice. He's making a claim about the nature of reality, the nature of this physical world that we're actually like moving around in. And what he says is that this world that we're sensing, the world of physical things in front of us, is constantly changing. Reality is constantly changing. You can't step in the same river twice. Why? Because what's a river? Well, it's a collection of water, right? When you step into the river, you come into contact with some water. But the river's changing. When you step in it again, you come into contact with different water. So it's not the same river. It's not just the water. The erosion and accretion, right? The river bed even moves over time. I mean, anything that is a complex collection of parts, you look closely, you're going to see it's shedding parts, it's gaining parts, right? I'm still digesting my breakfast, and I've done some other things. So, we gain, some skin cells. I am a different body now than I was yesterday, right? So reality is constantly changing. Plato kind of accepts that. He accepts that the sensible reality is constantly changing. The world that we perceive, not the world that we intellect, the world that we think about. That's a different kind of reality for Plato. But the world that we sense, the sensible world, is a world of constant change for Plato. Here's a strange implication of that. You can't have knowledge about the world that you sense. Okay, this is a little strange. Knowledge cannot be knowledge of the sensible world, because all knowledge claims are going to take a subject-predicate form, right? They're going to say that some subject is some predicate, is some way, right? Now, if our knowledge claims take this form, subject-predicate form, what happens if I say, hey, my car is red, how about? But then I realize my car is constantly changing. Parts are falling off of it. Sludge is becoming a part of it, right? It's constantly changing. There is no subject that persists from the beginning of the sentence to the end even. When I say my car is parked in the driveway, technically there's no such thing as the car, as my car. Technically. A knowledge claim needs to last. It needs to persist. So it's not the sensible world that gives us the grist for real knowledge. It's the intelligible world, the world that we access with reason when we think about the just, when we think about the beautiful. Beautiful is a weird one for us because we think of beauty as a subjective thing, but not for Plato. We'll just leave it at that for now. When we think about the circle, the equal, the one, these things do not change. Justice is justice. If I say that to be unfair is to be unjust. Okay, well, look, justice requires fairness. Justice is a thing that requires fairness. Fairness is a part of justice. Look, the fact that there's an injustice out there, that there are actions that are more and less just, that there are societies that are more and less just, there are people who are more or less just, that all is, constantly changing. The relationship between the physical things and the justice itself, is constantly changing. But justice itself, Plato thinks, does not change. The equal itself does not change. Okay, so knowledge can be had regarding the things that we can intellect, the things we can think about, those things that don't change. We don't get knowledge about those things that do change. What we get is something kind of close to it. Opinion is the word. I mean, the Greek is close to the word opinion. So Plato is practically, he's pretty much saying, opinion is what we have about physical things, not knowledge. I prefer to think of it as merely practical knowledge, okay? It's not technically knowledge, but it's good enough for practical reasons. Technically, my car is in the driveway. Ooh, what is the car? What is the drive? Technically, I'm not going to get knowledge of that, Plato says. Just ruled out because the subject doesn't persist to have, to hold the knowledge claims. But I know where my car is. I know how to find the car. I know how to go get my kids from school, So technically, my knowledge of physical things is not knowledge. But it, for practical purposes, is close enough. Okay, but if there is such a thing as knowledge, Plato thinks, there needs to be a reality, a real reality that doesn't change. The reality that we perceive here of the sensible world is a reality full of change. It's Heraclitus's reality. Plato thinks there's a higher reality out there that says these natures really exist. And they exist timelessly, and they somehow make things what they really are. So another chief doctrine of Plato's is the doctrine of recollection, which says that our knowledge of these forms actually somehow only happens because our souls existed before we were born. I mean, it's a little strange, and it's certainly couched in a lot of poetic language that Plato is going to say maybe doesn't entirely communicate the truth in the most straightforward way. It's not straightforward. Poetry is not. Anyway, the doctrine of recollection, it more or less kind of says that our knowledge of the general, our knowledge of beauty itself, justice itself, the good, and all that, our knowledge of that is inborn somehow. We're born, like pre-programmed with these concepts, and these concepts somehow shape the way we see reality. We'd only perceive something as beautiful because we have a confused notion of beauty. I don't want to go into the doctrine of recollection much further, but maybe suffice it to say that the problems motivating it are picked up by Augustine, and Augustine has his own kind of doctrine of recollection, which is the doctrine of illumination. Instead of we're pre-born with it, whenever we learn something, God communicates that truth straight to our souls, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so what are we seeing in this passage then when we're reading Republic, Book 6 and the beginning of Book 7? Two things that we really want to look out for. One is an aphorism about a ship in need of a captain. It's a really interesting passage. And it goes really far to show us who Plato thinks the philosopher is and contrast it with how the rest of society goes about kind of thinking about these things, which ends up being a lot of posturing and a lot of appeals to... we'll read it together and we'll talk about it. But the ship in need of a captain, right? The ship in need of a captain tells us why philosophers are seen as navel gazers or having their heads in the clouds. And let's see what we make of that. Okay, then the other thing that we really want to pay attention to is the three depictions of the good. The philosopher is trying to perceive the good, trying to understand what's truly good, not just what other people say is good. And in so doing, well, it's difficult. It's really difficult. Socrates says he's actually just incapable of giving a clear account of the good, like he has with some other things in the text. So instead, it's like, I got to tell you about the sun. The sun is like the good in a lot of ways. And then he tries to give us another account that's the divided line. The divided line is real. Read the divided line passage, see if we can make sense of it. I think what he's saying, question me on this when we talk, I think what he's saying is that people who judge reality, who try to approach reality through what they hear and see, are like people who confuse a reflection for the real reality. I think that's kind of what the divided line is saying, but there's obviously a lot more to that. And then the last part, the third account of the good comes in right at the beginning of Book 7, where we get the famous allegory of the cave. Plato's allegory of the cave is very powerful. This is, right, the Matrix. This is the Truman Show. Actually, I should say that the Matrix is a trans reading of the cave, and it is powerful, and it shows us how, well, we'll talk about it. Maybe let me give you a heads up for one other thing. After our discussion on Saturday, I want to also record, this is a preview, I want to record a little description of a recommended reading. I'm trying to make all the required readings for this course, accessible, free on the internet. Obviously, you can buy what you want, but I want it to be as accessible as possible. And so I'm largely looking at like classics that I know are free on the internet. But another text on this theme of enlightenment and autonomy that I think is really important, that I'm listing on the syllabus as a recommended text, is Sarah Ahmed. The article that I've taught from in the past that I find really powerful is it's called Killing Joy, Feminism and the History of Happiness. So look on this channel for... I'll give you a little lecture that tells you what I see in this text and what seems so important about it. And then, let me encourage you. Go track it down. Or if not, the article, Killing Joy, Feminism and the History of Happiness, there's a book version of it too, which is, I think, just called Happiness. And I don't have it in front of me right now. Oh, well. But anyway. Happiness by Sarah Ahmed, Ahmed. Think about it. If you're looking for something else to read, it's a real good one. And I'll give you a description. I'll give you a description about it after we talk about Plato. All right, thanks.